Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon and good morning to all our colleagues across the country. My name is Gina Ogilvie, and I'm a public health and family physician here in British Columbia. I'm a faculty member in the School of Population and Public Health in the Faculty of Medicine, and I'm a Tier 1 Canada Research Chair in Global Control of HPV-related diseases and cancer. And I'm really delighted to be here chairing this panel today on where are all the Black people underrepresentation in the Academy. Before we go any further, I want to take a moment to start by acknowledging that UBC Vancouver is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. UBC Okanagan is on the unceded territory of the Silks people. As we gather virtually today, please take a moment to remember the different territories that you are on and what it means for you as we talk about this very important topic. So as I mentioned, our discussion today centers on Black underrepresentation in medicine and in community health, and it's the third in a speaker series entitled, Where Are All the Black People? Underrepresentation in the Academy. I want to thank right now our event sponsors, who include the Office of the Provost and Vice President Academic at UBC Okanagan, the Office of the Vice President Students, UBC Equity and Inclusion Office, Michael Smith Laboratories, the Faculty of Science, and the Center for Culture, Identity, and Education. You know, to give context to today as we speak about medicine and Black underrepresentation in medicine and in community health, I want to share with you some of the calls to action that the Black physicians of British Columbia have had in addressing anti-Black racism and systemic discrimination in medicine. I won't go through all of the calls in detail, but I want to highlight some of them so you have a sense of some of the challenges that we face as we try to address underrepresentation. Some of them include collection and the need for collection of race-based data in medical school admissions and residency matching, and annually sharing this information publicly. One of the challenge and recommendations is to establish a Black student application program, along with the creation of a Black Canadian admissions committee with Black physicians and community members to involve and ensure that Black students have a fair chance at engaging and getting into medicine. Looking at dedicating resources to fund mentorship for Black students. Looking at the curriculum to ensure racial consciousness and incorporation of racism and impacts of racism on health are examined with input from the Black community. And so just a final other I'll share is ensure that there's a well-funded Office of Equity and Inclusion where there's dedicated experts on anti-Blackness and anti-racist work. So I want to thank the Black physicians of BC for these clearly laid out calls to action to the UBC Faculty of Medicine. And we look forward to hearing from the Faculty of Medicine here in British Columbia, but also I know there's also similar work going on across the country to address the significant underrepresentation of Blacks in medicine. So today we're really excited to have two esteemed colleagues and guests coming to speak to us about this topic. Our first guest is Dr. Alexandra Bastani, who is a cardiologist at the Thunder Bay Regional Health Center, and Dr. Majolo Amale, who is a surgical oncologist and physician at the Peterborough Regional Health Center. We're going to hear from Dr. Bastiani and Dr. Amale for about 20 minutes each, followed by a Q&A session where we'll open up to questions from the audience. So please make sure you're sharing your questions in the Q&A. I also want to remind folks this session is being recorded. There will be an auto transcript enabled, and that ASL interpreters have been made available, and we want to thank them for their important contribution today. And finally, the Q&A function on Zoom is also enabled. So first, let me introduce our first guest speaker. And as is not unusual when I get to chair a panel, our guest speakers are so enormously talented that I actually don't have time, and I don't think you want to hear from me doing their introduction. I think you want to hear from them. So I'm going to just highlight some of Dr. Bastiani's impressive curriculum vitae. She's a fellow of the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada, and diploma of the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada. She's a cardiologist at the Thunder Bay Regional Health Centre. Her medical degree in internal medicine and cardiology were conducted at the Université de Montréal in Quebec, and she graduated with honors, and she was a UDM Faculty of Medicine first valedictorian. She then completed a fellowship in interventional cardiology in Alberta, making her the first Black Canadian interventional cardiologist. She's fluent in English, French, and Haitian Creole, and is born and raised in Montreal from Haitian parents, and had a strong interest in community work among visible minorities. She's worked closely with community organizations and started career days for minority and children from underserved communities to provide them with representation and professional role models. Combining her expertise in cardiovascular disease and her passion for community work, Dr. Bastiani also is working actively to decrease race and gender biases, leading to different standards of care in clinical medicine. So Dr. Bastiani, over to you.
Hello. Okay, so good afternoon. It's the afternoon here in the east of Canada. So good morning and good afternoon. I'm Dr. Bastiani, and it is my pleasure and my honor to talk to you today about Black underrepresentation in medicine. Thank you for this introduction, Dr. Ogilvy. So first, except for being Black myself, I do not have any conflict of interest. So let's jump into the subject right away. Let me just, all right. So Canadian Medical Association, we all know about this organization, founded in 1867 by 167 doctors in Quebec City. And it has been serving the national representative body of medical profession in Canada since then. 153 people have headed the organization, and none of them has been Black. This is just one fact. The first Canadian medical school was founded in 1824, and we now count 17 medical faculties in the country. Not one single Black dean in all those 17 medical faculties since they were founded. Another great organization that we know about is the Canadian Medical Hall of Fame. Each year, 6 Canadian role models of excellence in Canada or around the world are inducted in the Canadian Medical Hall of Fame. Till this date, we count 137 inductees, and none of them has ever been Black. Closer to us, a recent analysis, a survey actually of 1,400 students was done amongst the 14 Canadian medical schools. And in 1.7% of cases, students were identifying as Black, which is a big contrast with the 6.4% of the population, of the Canadian population that's currently Black. And my story, so even closer to me, to my heart, my personal story, as you all know, I was born and raised in Montreal. 10.3% of the population in Montreal is Black. I attended the University of Montreal and I graduated, I got my MD in 2011. In a class of 263 students, only 3 students were Black. I also graduated as the first Black valedictorian of the School of Medicine. And after doing my fellowship in interventional cardiology for 2 years, I actually graduated as the first Black Canadian female interventional cardiologist. All first, it shouldn't be that way in 2021, right? So why are we discussing this? Why are we talking about this? We know that students from more diverse schools will value diversity more than students that don't have the chance to go to diverse school. The fact that being surrounded by racial and ethnic diversity will enhance the learning and the competencies for all doctors, not just Black doctors. Students who go to more diverse school also value diversity more, and they have a better way and are better abilities to work with patients from different backgrounds. Students in medical school also will have a better approach to affirmative action, and will value diversity in the society in general as well. We want to discuss this. We also want solutions. This report that was published in 2002 was very complete. And basically what we know is that the answer is to increase the proportion of underrepresented racial and ethnic minorities among health professionals. And we should do that early in their training. So step one is to recognize a problem. As we're doing now, we want to start a dialogue. We want to start talking about it. We know that there's a lack of engagement and constructive conversation about racial bias in Canada. And this conversation, this dialogue is very difficult. Why? Because it necessitates a violation of the politeness protocol. You know, talking about racism, talking about underrepresentation does not equal calling people racist. And that is a problem right now. We need to be able to talk about this without people feeling sensitive about this. There's also a notion that topics that are potentially offensive or uncomfortable should be avoided in a medical field, ignored, silenced, or even discussed just in a superficial manner. But here we want to talk about it and go deep and look for solutions. It also provokes discomfort. We know that for a fact, and it violates the academic protocol. Technically, we're supposed to be objective and have rational discussions. We should base all our conversation on evidences. We know that we're physicians or we're in the health system. But the thing is, racial dialogue is emotional. It is deeply personal. So there will be some emotional concept that will be brought to the conversation. It also violates the colorblind protocol, which is the belief that race is basically irrelevant. We should not see it. The thing is, we, people of color, want to be seen. They want to be respected and seen. So brace yourself. This will be uncomfortable, but it has to be done. The second step is to increase the number of Black medical students in medical schools. I mentioned this earlier. We know that medical students from underrepresented minority will more likely be underserving populations that are themselves from minorities population. We also know that they will provide care that is culturally safe. So I have a personal story. I won't be long. I just have a story that I remember from my residency years. I was in the second year residency in year in internal medicine, and a nurse came to see me for a patient, a Black patient that she could not understand, and she wanted me to go see the patient for her because she was refusing to take her bath and it had been a week. So obviously I said yes, and I went to see the patient. And before I entered the room, she said, don't expect to talk to her too much, because all she does is read the same page from that little book that she has in her hands, and she keeps mumbling. That's all she does all day. So I was like, okay, let me just see and see what I can do. So as I entered the room, this lovely lady, she was something like 92 years old or something like that. Her face just brightens when she sees me. And the little book that she was holding was the Bible. She was reading the same page because that was probably her favorite Bible, verse. And what she was mumbling, she was actually praying. So I ended up talking to her a little bit. She accepted to go take her bath. All she needed was someone who was understanding and seeing her as, not different, but just someone from another culture, right? So that's just an idea, just to say that people, not necessarily Black people, but students who are surrounded by diversity will be more sensitive to other people's culture. They will be more sensitive to differences, right? We also know that white students who attend a medical faculty with a more diverse population will be better prepared to care for patients who are themselves from minority populations. So a modern example of what I'm saying is that NOSM, which is the Northern Ontario School of Medicine, where I'm practicing right now, was established in 2005 by Ontario government, and it was to meet the health needs of residents of Northern Ontario. And it worked, because today most NOSM graduates practice in Northern Ontario. I'm not one of the NOSM graduates. However, I personally took upon me to have an active role in changing the current situation. So I'm currently a member of the Canadian Cardiology Society Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. And I'm also a member of the Canadian Women Heart Health Alliance, which has a lot of roles, but I am specializing in gender equity. So the third step would be to create an environment where Black med students and Black physicians can thrive, where they feel comfortable. In 2019, the AFMC did a questionnaire where 1 in 10 students reported being subject to racially or ethnically offensive remarks at least once during their training. We know that to be a better person, to be a better physician, we need to be able to practice and exist in a safe space. Black physician and Black student were more likely have an interest in leadership roles if they feel accepted and if they feel safe in the environment they're working with, Fourth step is to study the issue. We want to track the progress. And currently we know for a fact there is little to no data on Black representation in medicine, even in such an evidence-based specialty that is medicine. The AFMC had demographics until 2006, but then they stopped seeing color. And that question about race was erased from the questionnaire. We need a proof. We need a proof of the issue so we can start the change. So we can start the change in policies. So yeah. So in conclusion, we want to first acknowledge the problem. We want to discuss it. We want to talk about it and forget about the taboo and just tackle the problem. We want to fight for representativity and also for a safe learning experience. And of course, we want to document the journey. We want to document our experience and make sure that this is well studied as well. So thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bastanian, for sharing your experiences and for that really valuable presentation to start off our discussion today. Now we're going to move to our next speaker, Dr. Majola Amele, who is a breast surgical oncologist and a general surgeon. She completed her residency in general surgery at McMaster University and completed her fellowship in international surgery as a Paul Farmer Global Surgery Fellow at Harvard University. Subsequently, she completed a breast surgical oncology fellowship at the Roswell Park Cancer Institute in Buffalo, New York. Currently, she's a staff physician at Peterborough Regional Health Center, where she practices breast cancer and general surgery pathology. After years of seeing inequities for racialized communities in healthcare, she completed a Monk School Global Journalism Fellowship in 2017 to become an advocate. When she's not operating, she loves writing in-depth articles for publications such as CBC, The Walrus and Quartz, and Cityline about racial and social injustices as it intersects with health. She's on the board of Black Physicians of Ontario, where she works to combat anti-Black racism in medical education. She's also a member of the Temerity School of Medicine Admissions Committee for Undergraduate Medicine, where she advocates for improving diversity and expanding inclusion for medicine to reflect the general population. Her drive for improving systemic bias in medicine has led her to be a member of the Equity in Medicine and to advocate for improving physician training overall in the area of diversity. Thank you so much, and I'm going to hand it over now to Dr. Amele.
Good afternoon, and maybe still good morning in some parts to everyone. As Dr. Ogilvy kindly introduced me, my name is Majola Amele, and I'm a surgeon and also very much embedded in doing anti-Black racism work. So just to start off, Dr. Bastine did a wonderful job of just giving us an overview of what anti-Black racism and racism in general looks like in medicine. So when we talk about what anti-Black racism is a very concrete form of racism that is specifically against Black people, people of African descent, and this is rooted in the part of the vestiges of slavery and enslavement. And anti-Black racism is just not in medicine, it's in all parts of our different institutions. In other areas of Canadian life, we've spent some time investigating, what is the root cause of anti-Black racism and what are the ways to dismantle it. However, in medicine, we're a bit reticent to actually even look at the problem. One aspect of COVID that has really brought it to the forefront is the institutionalized racism in medicine and how it ends up affecting our patients. We know that race itself is a social construct, but the effects of racism is not. Data from across Canada has shown that Black Canadians on average earn less than 76 cents on every dollar to their white counterparts. And we know that economics also ends up being a huge contributor and a social determinant of health. So it's important to talk about why we care so much about anti-Black racism in medicine is the downstream effects of the Canadian population. Currently, the data is not very clear, but we know that currently the Canadian data of how many Black Canadians self-identify as Black is about 4.7%. But when we look at Canadian physicians, it's about 2.3%. And so there's a huge discrepancy on actually having representation of Black Canadians in medicine. The field of equity, diversity, and inclusion has become, a very popular in certain ways in medicine of trying to address some of these issues regarding systemic racism and anti-Indigenous and anti-Black racism. When we talk about diversity, a lot of medical programs have really stepped up of trying to create models of increasing diversity in the med school, because we know, as Dr. Bethany eloquently put, when we have diversity in medical school, it improves not just the lives of those people who are in medical school, but downstream effects of our patient and having, a very holistic patient care. Currently, University of Toronto was one of the first programs to start a program called BSAP, and it was the Black application stream, and they also have one for Indigenous student ISAP. Currently now, a few of more Queens, University of Western, Shoreditch, sorry, University of Calgary have also started their own, and I might miss some, who've also started their own Black application stream. And so what this program does is that it allows students who identify as whether Indigenous or Black to have an extra component in when evaluating their application. In reality, though, these students would have gone into even if it wasn't a Black application stream. And so it helps to identify and to improve diversity. As last year, we had over 30 Black students enter medical school, which is the most that's ever been across the country. But as much as that's really important to have diversity, that's letting us into the door. The next step is inclusion, is us actually having a seat at the table. And so that's the part that a lot of medical schools really focus on, is the inclusion of, how do we have, well, actually they focus a lot on the diversity aspect and need to also focus on the inclusion. I think to actually have the most impact is to focus on the equity part, because equity is, let's make the playing ground, the journey to get here, equal for all students. We can all speak from experience, and I can speak from experience as a Black Canadian, that my path to get to medical school is different than my white counterparts. And a lot of, whether it's Indigenous or other racialized groups, can talk about that. And some of the paths that students have mentioned to me is, a huge part of it is economic. Medical school tends to gear towards people who have a safety net in terms of finances, who are able to do the summer internships for free, who don't have to work in their summertime and during undergrad, so they can pursue research, or they can pursue other aspects of their the application that actually strengthens your application. However, when you're racialized and you are earning, your family's earning 76 cents on the dollar to your white counterparts, you do have to make up the gap in terms of helping out your family. And so that's one of the areas that needs to be addressed, is how do we make the playing ground even for all students who are trying to apply to medical school? Like, how do we, in our application process, take into account that, we won't necessarily, Black Canadians won't necessarily have the same experiences as their white counterparts when applying to medical school. And so I think that that's a really important part that we need to focus on, is equity. And that in itself, once we're able to address that, will actually increase the amount of racialized students, and in particular Black and Indigenous, into medical school, which will end up even out the playing field. And so that's part of the reason why we do have underrepresentation of Black Canadians in the medical field in general. Another aspect of it, when we talk about it, that I think is important to highlight, is that often we don't have a lot of Black physicians in academia. We know that there is an issue, and it was just published in I think it was the BMJ this week, that there's not enough of female leadership in academia. And I would say that that will also go in terms of having Black Canadians in academia, in medical academia. It still tends to be majority white and majority male. And this is important in terms of when we're looking for mentorship for students, because you get into the door, but to actually have power and to be able to execute improving the health outcomes of your patients, you need to be able to have a seat at the table. And if you do not have the mentorship within the medical profession, that becomes very challenging. So we train doctors that are racialized, and they tend to be in the periphery and not necessarily be in the academic centers. And that becomes an issue in terms of when we're talking about microaggressions that trainees face. Trying to create a safe environment for trainees it's paramount to also have people who look like them in positions of power there. I graduated medical school in 2000, I remember when, in 2007, and I would say that I did not see a lot of people who looked like me. And as I was going to training in general surgery, there was no faculty that were Black at that time, and the only other resident was my cousin, who was in plastic surgery. And that was really quite challenging in terms of facing microaggressions and feeling as if you can go to faculty to talk about what you're experiencing. So I do think that we need to also address that aspect of the lack of representation of Black physicians in academia, and that there needs to be, when we talk about quotas in terms of increasing women in positions of power, that we also need to talk about diversifying it, that there's also racialized individuals within these organizations who have a seat at the table, who are able to make fulsome changes to medical training, so we do create a safe space for our trainees. I think finally, the point that I wanted to emphasize is, people will ask, and I've seen them ask me online, why does it matter if you have a Black physician? Like, color shouldn't matter, you're practicing medicine. But as Dr. Bastien pointed out, that it is important in terms of being able to connect to your patients. And it's not just important for the Black physicians, but it's also important for all the other physicians to be able to learn how the difference in the textures of our patients. Like, people are not just their disease, they're full human beings, and the effects of their health is affected not just by the physiology of what's happening in their body, but also in the environment that they come from. And so what we bring to the table for our patients is that ability to understand that. And most importantly, is also to advocate. I think COVID has made it very clear that not everyone is experiencing COVID the same way. We know that over 80% of the people who have had COVID are racialized. And I'm in Ontario, which has become its own hotspot. And we know that, you know, the racialized communities are the ones who are feeling the effects of COVID, but are not receiving the same priority in terms of care. And so we're talking about essential workers, and we're talking about having paid sick leave, and we're talking about having equitable distribution of vaccines, where it hasn't been distributed equitably to actually address the fact that racialized communities have the least amount of resources and have the least amount of actual treatment when it comes to COVID. And one aspect of having physicians who are racialized is being able to advocate for our patients, being able to say, listen, this is affecting our community and this is what it looks like in our community. We need to do more. Being part of the Black Physicians of Ontario, we've done that for the Black community in terms of saying that, you know, this has to be done at a community level, and we need to go into these communities and actually serve them with culturally sensitive care, and at the same time being able to continuing to advocate for them. So that's it for me. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure, and it's an honor to be able to spend this afternoon with you.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to ask both Dr. Bastiani, Dr. Amelé to keep their cameras on, just so people can see you, because you are our two panelists. And we're going to be, I'll be sort of curating and sending the questions to you, but I know I'd love to hear your thoughts on first things. So I'm actually going to start, you're both trained back east in Ontario and Quebec. So could you particularly, I think, Manjula, if you could speak a little bit to the program in Toronto. I think that's been a huge success, and some of the elements you thought that was helpful to really change from kind of maybe 0 to 1 Black students to, I think this year, 25 to 30. So maybe you could talk about that and how you see that program could be sort of used across the country.
So I think that one of the best aspects of the program is a program that's run by a gentleman named Ike Okafor. It's within the Faculty of Inclusion and Diversity, and it's called the Community of Support. And so the program really is at the community level, at all the universities. It has partnerships with all the universities in Ontario. And its main goal is to help support the students. And so these are undergraduate students who have an interest in medicine. And so they have access to helping them write their application. They have access in terms of financial support, in terms of traveling, previously when there was traveling for interviews. They do interview preps, and really advocating for the patients, for the would-be medical students in terms of getting into the program. So that's really important. Like, I think it's great to create these programs, but without actually creating the foundation to be able to have students that you can mentor and you can help get into the program itself would not be useful, because you still, as I said before, you still have to have the same basically overall score as a non-racialized, non-Black student. So we need to also have that community of support in terms of helping them there. I think for the program to be able to be kind of replicated across the country is creating a network that's similar to that you're able to help students, not even just at the university level, but also starting at the high school level, to help them prepare to be applying to medical school. Medical school, unfortunately, is not something you can decide in like your third year of undergrad. Oh, okay, I think I want to become a doctor. It's something that you have to start planning for from your first year. And I think that having programs like that, like community of support, is really important in terms of helping to foster them and helping to help them navigate it. Because unless you have a family member that's a physician, you don't realize all that it takes to apply to medical school. And what the community of support is, it creates a sort of family members who have the experience of applying to medical school, being in medical school, to help you get into medical school.
Thanks, Alexandra. If you have any comments, and then I'll go to the next question. That was great. response.
Thanks, Majola. That was a great presentation. Thank you. And I cannot stress enough the fact that we need, yes, more role models in medicine, but it starts way before that. You mentioned the work that I did with my community center back in Montreal. It was a like kind of a day of you know, of we had multiple how can I say that professionals. It was not just medicine, but these kids were 10 to 12 years old. And when they saw me and they saw nurses and they saw lawyers, their eyes were big, and because they had never seen Black people doing these stuff before. So it starts way earlier than med school itself. And I think as physicians, we need to be available and, you know, offer this to younger generation. I know that University of Montreal created 3 years ago, or 3 years or so ago, a committee of diversity and equity. They are currently, you know, fighting and trying to develop a way to include more, accept at least more Black students in medicine at the University of Montreal. They recently had a forum on diversity and equity as well. So I think efforts are being made, but what we have seen with Ontario, this is something that I think that should be studied and replicated across the country, because it showed benefits, it showed a direct effect, and I think we can only learn from that.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to start with some of the Q&A that we're receiving. So one person is asking really about the sort of work environment and the environment about being a Black physician in healthcare. So one person was asking, how can one bring awareness to the racism present in someone's workplace without being seen as the complainer or without being seen as the insubordinate worker? So just love your thoughts. You are both in very you're both in situations where, as you both described, there's not a lot of Black physicians around you. So when you bring it forward, how do you deal with that?
Well, I can start maybe. So I think that at least how I do it is that I'm always very open and always ready to share my experience as a Black woman. Basically, I'm teaching all the time. I think that it can be it can become tiring. It can become difficult, and we don't always feel like explaining stuff to people from other cultures. However, unfortunately, it's part of the deal. That's how I see it. If we do that, it becomes easier when something happens, like a microaggression, or when a problem survenes. I think it becomes easier to kindly put our foot down and explain why this is not okay. Recently, a nurse put her hand in my hair, like inside of my hand. So my first reaction was to say, no, this is not okay. You can't do that. You can't touch my hair. I had said it before, and other people knew about my issue with people touching my hair, but she never heard me say that. So, the fact that I had been talking about this, while laughing and explaining this to people, it was easier to tell her that, what she just did is not okay. And she understood. Now, like I said before, it can be so intense to always be the one explaining stuff to other people. But if we want to change, we have to be the people trying to start it. So that's how I do it. I know that as a student, it was way harder, so much harder to actually do something like that, to be like, oh, you know what, I don't like that, or, that is not okay. Because there's a bias, right? Because the people who are evaluating you are usually, or not usually, but sometimes the people who are committing those microaggressions. So I don't know.
I think that's one.
Yeah,
thank you. No, I think there's sort of multiple ways,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's a super helpful sort of reflection. Jola, thoughts from you on this question?
So for me, I would say that, like, if I was being totally honest, when I was going through medical school, I didn't know half the time I didn't, not even half, 90% of the time, I didn't know what I was going through was microaggression. I didn't know what I was going through was that subtle form of racism. I just knew that I cried a lot. And I called my dad a lot in the middle of the day, crying about something that just happened. And I knew it made me feel bad, but I didn't know why it made me feel bad. And this is one thing that I love working with students for, is that they've actually given me a voice of for my past, because I didn't know what I was going through. And so I think that now is actually a much like a better time to train, because we can have open discussions about these, whether the open discussion is with other people who are racialized. And I think I get the comment of, you always feel like, are you the complainer? Are you the, and unfortunately, you can turn that. It's the same as when we look at misogyny of like, they say, oh, that guy is assertive or that woman is aggressive, right? I think that it's the same thing. It's just what language we choose to label it as. And so I don't look at those labels as I'm just going to advocate for myself and other people around me. I do think it's very important to have allies, and especially allies that are not necessarily of the same race that is receiving that microaggression. And being able to rely on other people to also help advocate for you, I think is very, very important. But I do think that, when I look at it now, it's that whatever I'm advocating for me, it's not just for me, it's for all of the other, I guess for me specifically, I talk about the female racialized surgeons who are coming up, is that it's for them. It's for them not to experience feeling sad, not to experience feeling bad and not know what the word is, and being able to say, no, what you just experienced is microaggression due to the fact that you're racialized female in this male dominated field. And so I'm not advocating, for me, that's easier to like, just like, I'm advocating not just for myself, but for all the women who are coming after me. And so that helps me to not really care about the label of, am I a subordinate or am I a whiner? I'm like, I don't care.
I love that positive reframe of you're doing this actually for the greater good and to set the path for other folks. Some good questions coming in, so keep them coming. Thanks very much. One is, and I think this goes back to, how do admissions committees, and I would also say this is, I think, an issue for students who come from lower socioeconomic. So how do admissions committees, or how would you recommend admissions committees consider the fact that, yeah, a lot of racialized kids work in the summer. They can't do that internship, and they don't have a connection to get that internship. So how do you think admissions committees can actually help to value that sort of non-medical school related but life essential things that many students from communities of color, Black students, have to spend their time?
I guess I can take this one. I think one step is to look at it and to see that, like, this student is spending, if there's like, is to also have as part of their application that you can have work experience. Like, work experience is just as valuable as research. And I would actually argue maybe more valuable. Like, I think if you had to work in the factories in the summertime, that to me shows you that you're mixing and integrating with your future patients. Like, how to relate to them, how to talk to them, how, what their struggles are. Like, you have an understanding of what it means that, okay, well, this person still came to work sick because they have to put food on the table. So the implications of that from like a public health perspective. So I think it's just literally to de-emphasize the role of grades in applying to medical school. A 3.9 GPA, that person is going to be the same as a 3.7 GPA. And, in terms of how good of a doctor they're going to be. So I do think that it's, actually kind of, I think it's going to be more challenging, but I think it's actually to par down and to say that, your work experience is just as relevant as your research experience. Is to put value on those things. That would definitely help even out the playing ground for racialized and people of lower socioeconomic applying to medical school.
Thanks. Alexandra, anything to add to that?
I can only agree. I think that work experience, volunteering, all these things are as important, if not more, in my opinion, than research before med school. I personally did not do research before med school. I'm not saying that it's not necessary. What I'm saying is that, you know, there's so many other things that makes you a person, that makes you yourself. So, and it can also, it says a lot about your character as well. So I think that, you know, everybody's different, and I think it should just talk, it just speaks about the person that's in front of us. And I think that, you know, to kind of minimize this racial bias that we have when we're selecting students, I was going to say patients, when we're selecting students, I think is to actually study those charts, those files, and without, you know, without having a picture or anything about the students, because then you see what the person is about, and then eventually, you know, you can understand, you can see and choose for yourself. But I think all those experiences are as valuable as research, if not more, to be honest.
Yeah, I would say, and you know, I spend my life doing pretty big research, and being a waitress on a busy patio where I had to deal with lots of nice people, but also lots of not nice people,
Hmm.
very inappropriate behaviors, very. It wasn't pleasant, but I probably learned the most, and it probably has been some of the most valuable things that I've taken into my career. So yeah, I think we need to make sure we understand all experiences.
Yeah, they
Oh,
call it the school of life, right? So I think
yes.
it's super important.
So I can see some of the attendees who I know well, and I can assure you I did not put this question in because one of my big recommendations as a public health physician, we do surveillance because if you don't measure something, you don't know what's going on. Bottom line. So I did not I did not prompt these questions, but we have two questions about the importance of data. And I think Brittany phrases it well here, where they say that they've had students approach them before to ask why data about race is being collected because it made them feel uncomfortable. And Dr. Bastiani, Alex, Alexander, you've said that we need data like this to move forward. How do we explain the beneficial way, or really actually how do we approach data collection so folks don't feel like they're being stigmatized and it's not being used to punish them, but actually we need this data in order to drive change? So I'm going to ask both of you to respond to that.
Well, I think that if we don't have a proof of a problem, we can't fight for change. This is just the baseline, the, you know, of why we're doing this. When we started, I think one of the ways that could maybe make people feel more comfortable is first to talk more about it. And I know that, you know, let's say before a survey or a questionnaire, there's also a little introduction on why we're doing this questionnaire. I think it could be incorporated in that little introduction, the importance of the questionnaire itself, and also of why we're doing this, why we're collecting the data about ethnicities or race. um, it is, I remember discussing this with colleagues before. In the United States, it's so easy to find data about anything. And it was so hard. I was working on this presentation, and it was so difficult to find data about Black people in medicine. I had to go back in the annals of University of Montreal and count myself so I could remember who was Black in my class. Like, and it was just kind of like a memory. It shouldn't be that way. It should be easy to know what is happening on that perspective. So,
And Alexander, that's the same thing we had here at the Black Physicians of BC. We had to go through portraits and count. I mean,
and
we
count.
can't. That's not an appropriate way to figure out how many Black students are in undergraduate medicine. Majola.
So I would say that, so the first part I wanted to answer was, you know, collecting race-based data in terms of patient outcome and patients. We collect data on their religion. And to this day, I do, like when patients come to the hospital, it's like, what religion are you? And I don't understand why that's even important. I've never seen that data being used, that Catholics, you know, recover faster after a appendectomy than non-Catholics. So I think that we have to just make it it has to be standard. Like, when you come into the hospital, you just check off, I'm Catholic, I'm Protestant, you see myself as Indigenous, I see myself as Black, and just make that as just like a normal part of our everyday existence. I do think that the conversation around COVID has shifted that, because people are starting to see that, okay, you know what, these are huge disparities amongst racialized people. And people will be, I think, more forthcoming themselves of saying, no, you know what, I'm comfortable saying that, identify as Black, that you're not going to use this against me. We talk a lot about medical mistrust in terms of Black communities. I feel like when we say mistrust, we put that on the patients as if it's their issue, where it's actually, it's been medical malpractice. And part of that is for us as physicians and the medical community is we have to rebuild those relationships with our community so they understand why we're doing the things that we're doing, that we're not looking that the practices of the past, which, tend to exploit them, is not going to be repeated.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think I think you're absolutely right. I think the fact that we're sort of cobbling together data about disparities in COVID, I mean, in 2021, that we just can't look at a data set, but that let's use neighborhoods, let's use forward sorting areas, let's use this, and we're retrofitting instead of proactively having this data is just not acceptable. I'm going to go to our next question, which is a little bit specific about UBC. Despite being the largest faculty of medicine in Canada, I know U of T grads don't like to hear that, but that is actually true. It has only Black students. It has only 5 Black students across all years. So we're almost at 300 per class, and we have 5 across sort of 1,200 students. How would you respond to pushback regarding admissions reform that uses the excuse of a small Black population in British Columbia? So just to give some numbers, we're at about 1 to 1.5% of folks in British Columbia based on the census identify as Black. I would argue just math, 1,200. So then, we should have at least 12 to 15 students who are Black. But anyway, thoughts about, well, there's a small population.
My first thing would say is that UBC is not just training doctors for British Columbia. You're training doctors to go across the country and hopefully to be ambassadors across the world. Unless UBC just wants to stay as just a local medical school, the goals of medical school is not just for that area. And also it's the fact that, yes, maybe you're saying that, okay, well, I think 5, as you said, as your master said, 5 is still a low number regardless. And it's about increasing the inclusivity of the patient care that you're offering. And that, to some experiences of Black Canadians intersect with experiences from other racialized groups. And that by having that, you're increasing the knowledge base for your students and also increasing the care that these physicians trained at UBC would offer. That's what I would say to them.
Thank you. Alexandra, any additional comments?
Yeah, I would just bring back a concept that I mentioned during my presentation. I think that having more cultural diversity in med school can only benefit Black students or let's say BIPOC students as much, if not more, white students. So it should at least be as much as in the general population. It's not normal that, let's say, somewhere like Montreal, if I take it back home, in a city where 10% of the population is Black, there's 1%, at less than 2% of the medical students that are Black. And when we look at people who are applying to med school, it's not that much either. That is not normal considering how many Black people there are in Montreal, and it would only apply to all other provinces, including BC. So I don't think there's an excuse here.
Yeah, and the other thing, when I've talked to folks, when we look at the Black physician in BC, what I would say is that 1% of physicians aren't Black right now. So we've got actually some catch up to do. We don't even achieve that right now. So we've got some catch up just so our practicing workforce even achieves that 1.5%. So I agree, it's not an excuse, and and I think we need to have a bigger lens. So thank you for your reflections on that. So we have someone here who's asking about advice for students on ways to get involved with EDI advocacy. This is a female Indigenous medical student. Communities are linked in solidarity and would love to help amplify these voices in meaningful ways. I'm going to give one just quick reflection for me and then hand it to you. I would say one thing UBC has done very well has been their Indigenous medical student program, where they have in many ways done what U of T has done in terms of sort of supporting and cultivating promising students from sort of earlier days. And I think advocating and supporting those kind of programs for Black students where you have successes. And so we've got the program in Toronto that I think has been a success. And we certainly have programs in British Columbia where you have had success in supporting Indigenous medical students. So endorsing, supporting, advocating for those type of programs for Black medical students here in British Columbia, I think is important. But I'd love to hear your reflections across the country. How do engaged and keen students who want to advocate, want to support, want to address the underrepresentation, how can they help?
I would say that one aspect is the different across the there's a Black Medical Student Association of Canada. So that is across the across the country in terms of advocating and working with undergraduate students and doing the advocacy work. So it's very, if you go to their website, it's very easy that you can find different links in terms of how to get involved. So I think that that's actually really important. And, it's always hard because I know that it's Ontario based because I know the leaders of them. So I think having someone who represents out west is really, really important. Having someone, I think it's always hard for us to find people, in the West, not so much in the East, like Scotia, but in, the Western provinces in terms of helping to support movements about Blackness in that region. So getting involved with the BMSAC would be amazing. And they would love to have, people who are engaged in that and trying to build that support network and in the Western provinces also.
Thanks. Alexandra?
So yes, definitely there's that. And if I would also suggest to the students, let's say you're starting medical school or you're interested in medical school, don't hesitate to go further. I know that the CCS, the Canadian Cardiology Society, just created this year Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee, which I'm part of, and we were looking for a fellow or a student to be part of that committee. It's it's never too early or too late to get involved. So even if it's a bit more specific to cardiology, you can get involved. And there, the other thing that I would also suggest is to be active on Twitter. It looks kind of weird as an advice, but I met people on Twitter. I discovered that hashtag cardio Twitter and then that Black in Medicine hashtag, and I met people through the social media. It's also a very big a way of meeting people and also be part of association, not necessarily in Canada. So these would be my advices.
Thank you. I think those are really important reflections and great advice. And thank you for that question. I'm really excited that this question has come up because we often talk about undergraduate medicine. And as much as it's a black hole of knowledge for undergraduate, I'm thinking residencies are even worse. We simply don't have the data. And it's really challenging to be, and you both spoke about being the only Black resident in your programs and what that is like. So I'm going to start with the second question first. How do we increase interest and ability for a Black person to undertake a particular specialty when there may not be any Black people to be found in that specialty? Maybe Alexandra, I'll start with you first and then go to Majula.
sorry. Um, it is definitely something that can be intimidating. It was for me, at least. People overtly said to me that I shouldn't I shouldn't do that. It wasn't for me. Why do I want to do this? All kinds of questions. So it's definitely difficult. I don't think I don't have a like kind of like a good answer to that. But what I can say, however, is that we're starting to see more Black people, and I'm always so happy to get messages, either emails or Twitter or on LinkedIn, of students who just want to do what I want to do, what I did, and who are just coming at me as a, not necessarily a mentor, but just for advices or anything like that. So, don't be afraid to go outside of the province. Don't be afraid to go outside of the country to seek advice. Um, Obviously, in the United States, we know they have more Black doctors of anything. So it could be easier to go there, but don't be afraid to go to leave your territory borders, let's say. So that would be my first answer.
So thank you, but also a bit heartbreaking that we're saying to Black physicians that one of their considerations needs to be to leave to feel welcomed. And I think that's really underscores the sort of the magnitude of the issue here in Canada. Majola, what are your thoughts, and maybe answer specifically, what do you think residency programs can do to address this?
So I think that, as I mentioned before, it's like there is lots of diversity in academia, but that doesn't mean that there is not, outside of the academic walls, physicians who look like you, who are doing what you want to do. I do think that's why organizations like, as a Black physician, I would say like the Black Physicians of Ontario, the Black Physicians of Canada is, it's a great place to just like email and just like, hi, do you know any, Black interventional cardiologists, or do you know any Black vascular surgeons who are part of your membership? And that is a good way of trying to get that membership. And they might be able to connect you with allies in like within that they know that who might be in different parts of academia. I would say the other aspect is that not all allies necessarily have to look like you for them to have allyship. I would say one of my biggest mentors is a white surgeon, and she's phenomenal. And she understands what life is like as a racialized person. And she's mentored not just me, but other students. I guess we're no longer students now, but other surgeons throughout. And it's, seeking those people, and it is challenging, I do find, but it's, having conversations and talking openly about, why do you want to go into this field? What are some of the, what are the things that are holding you back? And having those conversations with other people will help lead you to find someone who could be your ally and who could be a powerful ally to kind of help propel your career.
Thank you. That very, very helpful. And Alexandra just added to the chat to inquire by the Black Association of your school. So I think that's a very, very important thing. Then the first part of that question is, how do you propose that individual specialties address this underrepresentation while working in harmony and not overlapping with the faculty of medicine? So I can imagine this, you've got someone in OB, you've got someone in peds, you've got someone in, surgery, all trying to address the underrepresentation. How do you think they can come together? What are your thoughts about that? And I think Majola, you spent a little time on the sort of the admissions side at U of T, I think more undergrad, but when you talk to department chairs, what are their reflections? Alexandra, what are some of their reflections, advice you have for them?
I think that they're all fumbling. I don't think they all have a good answer for it. I think that for them, they think, well, we just have to, if we pick the best candidates to apply into academic medicine, we have that, it is what it is. And they're trying to create an environment of inclusion without actually having inclusivity. I do think that at a certain point, we do have to start talking about, you have to look at, having the experience of racialized academic staff within your department. I think that people in medicine find that very hard, and they find that very unpalatable, that, oh my God, I'm going to have to factor in that this person is a Black person into hiring them. But they look at it, you're female. They look for female department heads. Like, they're like, I know some of the hospitals in Toronto, which are notoriously all boys club. Like, there's an emergency department who's never had a female head. Well, as of March 1st, they hired their first female head. She's not the first competent female head of department that's been around, but once they were exposed in the Globe and Mail, they decided, okay, well, we need to start thinking about that. So I do think part of that is that, you're going to have to face the misogyny and the racism that's within medicine, and say, okay, we're going to have to make a concerted effort to hire someone, because the talent is there. It's just the opportunities are not given to racialized individuals.
Thank you. Alexandra, any additional comments from you?
I mean, except for, I'm not sure I understood quite well the question, but so basically what we're trying to do is, how do we kind of join forces? That's what I understood, right? So I think that I mentioned associations before. There's the Black Medical Association as well. I think that having kind of a common house of Black people is something that is super important. I think that if we get involved as physicians or as students in the Black associations, it is basically blind to what specialty you're in. And I love that what I'm seeing right now, because Black students are just raising and marching and then talking and, calling injustice. So, even before starting their subspecialty, they are already joining forces. So I think it's going to change. It's going to become easier to talk amongst ourselves, amongst, people from visible minorities. But for now, definitely not be afraid and just call it out and approach people. And I mean, that's what I'm seeing right now.
Thanks. So before I go to this next question, I want to ask something you both spoke about. So I think there's a couple things. I think medicine, to get, as you said, Majola, to get into medicine, it's not like in third year you go, yeah, I think I'll apply. It is a long process. I think one of the things we need to encourage, particularly Black students, to think about is you also don't have to go to medicine right after your undergraduate. And I trained in Hamilton, and so at Mac we had lots of people who had careers, who had both health and non-health careers, who then went back. So I think that's one of the things we need to really sort of remind folks, is that the path isn't always have to be that 4 years and then you go to medicine. And in fact, I think it's a real blessing when you meet folks who've sort of stepped out and have worked and come back. They bring a really important perspective. But I want to talk about that mentoring idea of folks, for me, grade 3, grade 4, grade 5, where kids start to shape who they think they can be. And what can we do? Because I actually think that's where a lot of it starts. I mean, I don't think high school is too late. I don't think third year is too late. You may need to not apply for fourth year, but what do you think we can do in that middle school, high school, to really start to have young Black kids really see themselves that, yeah, this is something I could do?
Well, you said it. I think it starts before medical school. Personally, I grew up in a system where there's no undergrad. So basically, if after 2 years after high school, there's 2 years of college, and then you apply to whatever program you want to get into in the university. And sometimes, which could be the equivalent of an undergrad, some people go do something else, like let's say 3 years of physiotherapy or something like that, and then they come back and reapply to medicine. So I think that it should start before that, because then all the good grades and the extracurricular activities and all these things that make you a great candidate for medicine, you can do that in a year and a half or 2 years before applying to medicine. It has to start earlier. My parents were very open and helped me a lot throughout all my process, which started basically when I was 6 years old, because I said I wanted to be a doctor. So they were like, yes, nice, let's do it, right? But if it doesn't start that early, it should, at least in high school, when they have career days, I never saw a Black person at my career days, ever. And I was 5 years in a very good high school in Montreal. There was not a lot of Black students, but that's not the point. There was no one who was Black. So in my head, let's say I wanted to be a doctor, fine, but I did not have any kind of, role models in front of me to say, it's possible, you can do this. So starting there, I think is super important. Reach out to your old schools or to community centers like I did. These things are super important. Just go out there and make yourself visible, because that's what they need. That's what I think, at least. They just need to see that it's possible. So
thank you. Joa?
I think it's just important to, for us as physicians who identify as Black, is to be out there. Oftentimes, students say, well, they're tired of being labeled as the Black medical students. I'm like, well, it's not easy, but this is part of what we do, is that you do, like, we're not trudging you out, as others. We're in our own community. And so every career day that I'm asked to be part of, I say yes to. Whether it's for high school students, whether it's for middle school students, I never say no, because they just need to see that this exists, and that it's not, because I think oftentimes they think, oh, that's boring, oh, that's hard, or, they just have a very different view of what a doctor looks like. And they just need to see that, okay, this does exist, and this is what it possibly takes. I give out my emails to all of them. I'm like, email me, whatever I can help connect to, whatever programs you need to do will help you get there. And so I think that that's really important, is that we might only be, 2% of the Canadian population, but we have to, unfortunately, part of the burden is we have to work as if we're 10%. And we have to be doing outreach, and it is extra on us, but the hope is that the generations that come after us will have to do less and less work, and they could also just exist as a doctor and not have to be a Black doctor.
And to that point, I will also say is we need a better recognition of, frankly, there are resources in the academy. And so, Joel, if you are getting asked to do this work, maybe the academy should be offering you a part-time assistant to help to coordinate that, to respond to emails, so there are ways, I think, that the academy, and I'm naming the academy because that's what the conversation's about, where the academy can actually support us to do this work, because as for all of us, this is all the offline stuff that we do in the evening, and when other people are doing other things, we're actually still working on this stuff. So I think really important.
And also, I think for it to be valued, I think for it to be valued that Dr. Ogilvie does this work, and that there has to be a part of your CV that's all, this is the EDI work that you do, and for it not to be like, oh, extracurricular, but this is actually part of your work. Yeah. And I think that that's also part of it that makes people less likely to do, because it's like, I'm just doing this for free, but it's like, no, this has to be valued in academia also, as this is important work that we do.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to take these last two questions. Asman, I don't know if you're monitoring the chat, but we've actually answered that first question. So the next one is about CARMs. So we've got three. So I'm going to, we're going to stop it at the next three. So I'm on my program's CARMs selection committee, which has similar issues to the medical school selection process you've looked at. Do you have any suggestions for how to revamp CARMs? They're both shaking their head and grasping their foreheads.
I was like, CARMs, how to revamp CARMs.
And this may not be something, I think what this person has identified, and we may not have the answer today, is that there are many touch points along the way where there can be added burdens for Black and underrepresented students. And this year, even just having virtual interviews, I know for many students of color and for many Black students, the costs of flights for electives, the cost to sort of jaunt across the country that was prohibitive. So we might say, oh, there's a really great surgical program that felt really welcoming to them, but they couldn't afford 6 flights for a program they were sort of middling interest. So I think I would say one of the exciting opportunities is the potential for virtual interviews that then allows people. But maybe what I'll do is I'll move to the next question, but I'll frame that, yes, we understand that there are barriers that a process like CARMS intentionally puts in that make it hard for Black students.
Right. Just one other thing I wanted to add. What I wanted to add to that is, I find that oftentimes racialized medical students do a lot of work that is not specific, that are maybe viewed in the realm of public health, and are not necessarily viewed in the realm of, oh, I want to become an interventional cardiologist, or I want to become a surgeon. And so oftentimes they're like, oh, well, should I do that research? Like, it's really interesting to me, but how can I use that towards my general surgery application? And I'm like, and we have to stop that. Any form, whether it's qualitative research, research is research. Being engaged in communities, being engaged in a community, and advocacy work is also should be viewed equally as research work when you're applying to these programs. Because, we become advocating for our patients, we're physicians first, and then a specialist second. So that's one thing that I would say that needs to be viewed differently by program directors, is that, a lot of us do work that is viewed traditionally as the realm of public health, but it's because this is the things that affect our community.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, so this is a tough question because I think we've all experienced it. I've heard from racialized physicians that they've experienced racism from patients, and I think we can all report them. Many times we were called many inappropriate things, asked not to care for a patient, all of that. I think we've all had it. What do we do to address this? Because I think the traditional knowledge is the physician has power in the relationship. And so therefore, I know in my training, I didn't even bring it up. And if I did, I was sort of just told to suck it up because, so the belligerent, drunk goof who was telling me things in the emerge, I was just told to suck it up and get back in there and sort of deal with the patient because you were the physician and had the power in that. Thoughts on that? Experiences?
I've had experiences as well. I mean, don't we all? I made it a point. I remember you mentioned, Majola, earlier that you called your parents crying more than once during residency. That marking me too. That was one of the events that marked me and that shaped me as a physician forever. That one day a patient told me something that in my head was absolutely unacceptable. I did not wait to call my dad. I stood, I put my foot down. He said something absolutely, I will not repeat that, but it was so inappropriate. I put my foot down, and I was a resident at that time. I said, sir, you will be seen by my supervisor. I will not see you today. This is highly inappropriate. And I went up to my supervisor and I said, I did not ask. I said, I will not be seeing that patient. I do not remember the end of the story. I know I did not see the patient. I did not get into trouble. But from that day on, I told myself, I am a person. I am a physician, a person, and I deserve respect as much as someone else. I was mentioning earlier how it's difficult to, especially as a student, to put your foot down and say no because you're scared. You're scared for your evaluations. You're scared to be seen as the angry Black woman. So you're scared to do these things. However, this will shape you as a person and as a physician for the rest of your days. It did for me. And I think that it's super important to do it. Now, you can't always do that. I think that it's okay sometimes to kind of not see things. You can't fight every fight. You need to choose your battles. That's my personal belief. So sometimes it kind of goes unnoticed. But most of the time I have to say that I am not the person to not say something. We're humans. We deserve respect as much as anybody else. The fight starts there.
And I think, Alexander, what you talk about there, and I trained a few years before y'all. So I think that wasn't part of the culture, and I was expected to just suck it up. And I think there weren't a lot of Black physicians around, so it didn't seem like a big deal. And I think people didn't understand what it's like when you've got a patient saying really awful racial slurs to you, and you're expected to sort of march forward. So I think what you've just said is what should happen, which is you should be able to step away from that care and have someone else step in, and you don't have to sort of explain, justify. It just is. Jola.
I agree with both of you. I think that gone should be the days where you have to suck it up. Obviously, I think if it's like in a trauma situation, and then you just do what you have to do at that moment. But if there is no like immediate imminent threat to that person's life in terms of receiving medical care, is to just say, you know what, we do not have a good therapeutic relationship. So therefore, I'm going to, because medical legally, you can, as long as you find someone to care for that patient, it is fine. So when you are a student and when you're a resident, you go to your supervisor. And if they don't support you, then that should give you pause. When you're the staff, is to be like, you know what, I'm going to give you to my colleague because I don't feel like we have a good therapeutic relationship, and this could become a problem down the road. And I've been in that situation. I've had great colleagues, and hopefully most people are in a place where they do have great colleagues that they can give that, they can, refer that patient to that somebody else to take their spot. But I think gone are the days where we have to kind of suck it up. It's the same as gone are the days where we have to suck up misogyny. We're able to advocate for ourselves and say, no, this is not okay.
Thanks. And then a very sort of quick question about, do any of the Black Physicians Associations in BC or Ontario have programs where they intentionally go out to speak to third and fourth graders? The first thing I'm going to say to that is I think we need to remember these Black Physicians Associations are all volunteer. So this is not any of our full-time jobs. So we all have our full sort of clinical research practices, et cetera. And then we do this on top of it. And they're not publicly funded. It's all funded by membership. So again, it's ironic, but it's ourselves paying to do this. So again, these are, I think, ways where the Academy can support is by funding. I know that our Black Physicians of BC, and I don't want to speak, I'm not sure if any of our leadership is on the call, but I know they are engaged in mentorship program. Thanks, Paul. I know they are engaged in mentorship and have been doing mentorship programs. I'm not sure we're in that sort of young group, but I think that's really important because I think back to what Alexandra said, if we don't see Black folks in those positions and in that area. I remember very clearly, for those of you in Ontario, going to the Stratford Festival when I was in grade 5 and 6 and 7 and 8. And I never once saw a Black lead, ever. I still remember there was one sword holder in like Romeo and Juliet. He was like back holding a sword in the middle of the fight with Mercutio and Tybalt. And that was it. And I remember sitting there going, okay, so I guess I can't be an actor, a Shakespearean actor. Like, literally there was never anyone. And so I think we have to know how critical it is to see people like you in those roles. And so what I would say is, and maybe you both can speak to the Black Physicians Associations you're involved with, I think we all see it's really important. I think we're trying to do as much as we can with the limited time and resources that we have. So maybe Majola and Alexandra, I'll get you to come.
So I know that, for example, like I'm involved in it, like, so the Black Physicians of Ontario, the Black Medical Student Associations tend to ask us to come and do those talks. And so a lot of the Black medical associations, I used to just be U of T that had the Black Medical Student Association, but now there is, some at almost every school across the country. A lot of them, they do that outreach work, and they'll tap us to come and do the talk for them, to talk about, what it's like to be a day in the life of a, general surgeon, interventional cardiologist, a public health physician. So in a roundabout way we are, but our main focus with the Black Physicians of Ontario is really that undergraduate and resident and the medical student, and really supporting them. But they use us when they do their outreach.
Thanks. And Alexandra?
Same here. So I most of the time, people call me to give talks or to be a representative or anything like that. So personally, what I do is I make sure that I'm available most of the time. And I was lucky to get a little bit of coverage in the last year because I was the first Black Canadian interventional cardiologist. So I kind of got a little bit of coverage from that, and people have been calling me and messaging me to speak. So I think that, like Majella was saying before, just trying to always be available for that is super important. Um, th- that would basically be my answer. But I usually don't necessarily myself go out there and volunteer or anything like that. It's usually the other way around.
So I think what we're describing is we recognize this is really important, but with the sort of narrow bandwidth and support that we all have,
Yeah.
we haven't even gotten there yet. So this has been a really robust discussion, and I really want to I think again, folks need to recognize that for these two, they have a day job, so they've probably got their busy surgical and cardiology practices. So they've stepped away from those to do this for us. So I really want to thank you for doing that. I know that it takes time. It takes time away from your patients, takes time away from other important work that you're doing as well. So really want to thank you for this. I want to thank UBC for organizing this really important conversation and for this series. And I want to encourage you all to share some of your reflections with us and to look at some of these important websites that are trying to work to address some of the significant underrepresentation for Black people in the academy, but also specifically today around for Black people in medicine. So thank you very much, and best wishes to everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. That was a great experience.